Have fun. Good luck.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Cold Tuesday. I'll try to warm you up. Probably not. Probably. These won't be very funny. They're kind of serious. They're kind of sad. Hopefully they'll do something else for you. Okay, so I'm going to read a few poems, about 5 poems, and a few short pieces from the Riots. And I'll start with poems, and then go on to the Riots. First I'll read from Lovely Asunder, the first poem in here, in the classes I was speaking to today. Oh, I completely forgot to thank everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for hosting me. And I visited the class earlier. Y'all asked great questions, and I've had a lovely time here. The first poem I'm going to read is the first poem of the manuscripts of Lovely Asunder. And I generally like to think of the opening piece of any book as being a kind of point of inquiry into that book. And in this particular case, I took that a little bit literally, and so it's a series of questions. And so it's called Interrogation. How did you get here in the wet garden on your bloody knees? And where is your mother's brown dress smelling of nickels and butter? Why is your father yelling from his bedroom window, and what of the gun? Why can't you untangle your ankles from the cucumber vines? How does it feel to press your small, hot cheek to their leaves? Can you hear the evening sprinklers start up like gossip over the dry lawns? Soon the whole world will be shining with lies. Doesn't that make it easier? Can you feel the tall pines leaning away, closing the clouds like white curtains? And the neighbors, where is the old woman who always keeps one yellow eye on her nectarine tree? Why do you dream of finding the corpses? Why do your father's eyes fill up with blackness, and what of the gun? Why do you press your hand to your chest when he aims? Don't you know it won't keep him from shooting? And where is your mother's brown dress? Can't it hear you crying? Why won't it come home? When his bullets pierce the tree instead of your body, can you sense your face going suddenly calm as the scent of the neighbor's lilac drifts toward your pulse in the garden and hangs itself over your head as if it had prayed for you all of its life and finally found you? How do you know, without the words to say it, that you are the summation of a lifetime of desire? And when you know, do the stars emerge from blackness or arrive like shots in the sky? The next piece I'll read, For My Sister in the River. And this is, I have 2 sisters actually, and I write about them interchangeably, and often I conflate them in the poems, which is sort of amusing for them to try to figure out who's who, and they like to argue over, well, I didn't do that. You know, it's my artistic endeavor to, apparently to confuse them. It has a little epigraph from John 1:23. It says, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness. I was trying to be cruel when I threw the rhododendrons in her hair. It was spring, and the petals were sticky, bruised and crimson against her dark hair. But instead of crying, she laughed, spun herself into this photograph of a girl dancing in circles so fast her body blurs her head a deep magenta and earth. My sister is small and stronger than she looks. In a decade, she'll arrive late at the door, her lip split, eye swollen shut, her baby girl flushed with tears wound around her like a delicate vine. She'll walk into the kitchen, sit down on linoleum, say, I'll never go back. I'll want to believe I hear her voice filling with her voice from the river we swam as girls, where we'd take turns being John the Baptist, drenching each other in the muddy tide. Underwater, I could feel my sister's skinny arms straining to pull me through currents, lift me through the dark surface, press her fingers to my forehead, say, "You're forgiven. You're healed." We were too powerless to be prophets. I don't mean halos appeared above us in the river or the kitchen was lit by anything other than streetlight lost from the roads outside. Just that we knew, without psalm or song to guide us, we had to save each other. I'll read a poem that I mentioned earlier today. It's called "I Want You Dangerously," and I wrote it after I read Shakespeare's sonnets for the first time, which happened, all in succession, which happened very late in my life, considering like the rest of my education. I probably should have read them, like 15 years earlier than I did. But I was really struck with how emotionally complicated the whole sonnet sequence is, and was especially taken with the Dark Lady sonnets at the end of that sequence. And I was interested in trying to sort of explore her perspective, and so this is sort of written from the Dark Lady's perspective back to the lover. And the title goes directly into the first line. I want you dangerously open, but I am a woman, so cannot open you the way I would if at the hinge of your spine, the tight latch of your knees, I had a key or hammer. I mean no violence, just as good men never mean violence, but still I tremor. Your mouth a ruin, your eyes like the dark ascending wings of a bird. I watch magpies destroy the nests of sparrows, pillage, plunder. If I were a Viking, I'd take you home, my only and best prize. I'd marry you to my bones. Oh, tell me you want my burnt sage saltwater scent, my barricade across the roads of your body. Or tell me to leave you the fuck alone and I'll go further inland like a lenient hurricane, all of your beautiful levees intact. I'm going to read a couple of new poems. I'm working on a new manuscript. I don't know where these will fit in or if they'll fit in. We were talking earlier about how to have a collection of poems, how to figure out what goes in and what stays out. This poem, I don't know that there's necessarily much to say about it in explanation. It's wholly imagined, I guess there's that. I have no autobiographical connection to what it's saying, but it's called The Physicists. Perhaps we never went to Spain, where the ciders are more sour than sweet, and where we never followed a night parade in the street, the drums and spinning torches, the people whose faces blurred in the barely there light and shadow. Now time makes them impossible to see clearly. Now they are only a blur of human forms, as indistinct as the voices that rose from the cobblestone, calling us down and out and away. We loved each other once. How unremarkably the street lamps shone that night. How unspecific the music that we were certain was a sign. When we arrived in the plazuela, it was midnight, and a bonfire glowed on everyone's faces, everyone who was called, or so they believed, by the burning drums, the dancers' rough pirouettes, the thrill of not knowing where we were led. No one can see the black holes they tell us are spinning in space with the earthly eye, but we believe they swallow everything, and beyond the laws of physics which tell us nothing disappears, there is only altering, transformation. Even the physicists are afraid that when those dead stars stop spinning, everything they drew into them will cease to exist. We circled the bonfire, dizzy with cider the way cinders amplify the night, until the parade broke up, and without knowing why, we stopped dancing, turned back to our rooms, our room, where, some nights, when I drew the wooden shutters, the air was so still, so dark. This one I'm reading because Eastern Oregon is in it. As David was saying, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and I hardly ever left, except for a few times when I was growing up to Eastern Oregon, which was very exotic to me. It was a very exotic locale. You know, I was like, oh, I'm going over the mountain. What's going to happen? Anyways, it's a fairly long piece. It's a poem. I sort of went back and forth about whether or not it should be an essay. So this is one of these in-between pieces. So I thought I'd use it as a transition between. The title is taken from the title of a Montaigne essay. I love Montaigne. If you haven't read any Montaigne, he's so deeply bizarre and wonderful. You know, he sort of incorporates infinite knowledge with personal experience and reflection. So anyways, this is one of a poem in a series of what I think of as Montaigne poems. And the title is, Our Emotions Get Carried Away Beyond Us. When Pythagoras conceived of the music of the spheres, he believed he understood the universe, how celestial bodies moved in musical ratios, the world sensible and clean. This is why he lived simply in the hills with his students, the mathematicoi, without need for possessions, women, or meat. The universe could be explained in rational signs, so they drew equations and played instruments, not to please the gods, but maintain their order in the universe. In the course of their practices, however, they found the proof of irrational numbers and concluded that the universe also contained things that are irrational. This idea so threatened the Pythagoreans that they kept its existence a secret. When one of the students told an outsider about it, they drowned him in a lake. It's instinctive to be drawn toward water, thirst, baptism, a longing to be clean, so he would have thought nothing of following his friends, dust rising from the roads like a thin, glittering shroud. It was night, but because the day was hot, the water would have been as warm as a body, like the summer waters of any dry landscape. Eastern Oregon, even with its bronzed hills, the air pungent with sage. I went there one summer with a friend I followed everywhere. She was a year older, lithe and electric, said she knew about men. We spent our days wandering whatever route led away from her family's cabin, whatever cut through the knotweed and short, twisted pines, while I asked questions and she instructed, sometimes stopping in the shade of a boulder to practice kissing. It hurts like this, she said, touching my sunburned shoulders, thighs. It always hurts like this, until we grew weary, then wandered back. She also taught me how to measure the distance of lightning from earshot, count the seconds between flash and thunder. Once we were caught in a storm and ran home late, soaked, her mother and father already fighting by the time we arrived. Her mother burned the meat. He threw her by her shoulders to the floor, called her idiot, let his fist hang over her white as a star. And by daylight, the women with their coolers by the river, over their minted cigarettes and solo cups full of gin, squinted toward their children wading in the water, talked about the latest news. A woman who, sick of loneliness, drowned her children for the man she loved. They shook their heads, a slow, uncertain no, and sipped until the faint glow of their smokes lit intermittently in the darkness, a code. Years later, when trying to leave a brutal lover, I would return to him crying, and he would bite into my shoulder, leave a plum-colored bruise, and I'd think of those women, of how we deserved it. It hurts, it always hurts, like this, my friend murmured to me, in shade or in darkness, But each morning when we left the cabin, the sun slanted toward us, two bright arrows. We were silent as we aimed for the old familiar trail, silent as we wandered away from the path, each other, to walk figure eights in the wild scrub brush, listen to the patterns of the wind. We like to say the song of the wind, but if there is a song, it offers no meaning, no explanation, only a music we can't order, or else an order that's always undone by what we don't yet perceive. So, no perfect music, as the mathematicoi believed. Only the few notes Pythagoras must have hummed to himself as he walked back beneath the erratic stars, his sleeves and hem still wet from the lake. Only his voice wavering above a rhythm of footsteps as he wove between the dark arms of juniper, while the boy's eyes, beneath the water, no longer seeing, remained open. Okay. Now we shall turn to some nonfiction, which will be just as serious. I wish I had some funny. It's so hard to write funny. I've tried to. I'm really bad at it. I amuse myself, and then I hand it to anybody, and they're like, what is this? Okay, so I'll stick with serious. I see the way I approach poetry and the way I approach some essays are somewhat similar in that a lot of times if I'm contemplating a subject or I find myself writing about it, I'm interested in sort of getting at it from sort of various perspectives to a certain extent. So I have this, I'll have a subject and I'm just sort of spiraling around it. And hoping that my repetition of thinking about it will sort of provoke something new in thought around it. And it's somewhat similar to the way that I constructed this particular essay, which is called Mercy. I started writing about, this song called Mercy, and then found that it sort of spiraled out from there. So you'll hear how it goes. It was a kind of mercy playing that old upright, scratched mahogany, little coffee cup halos burned into the surface, tarnished strings pulled wrong. It was a gift from an uncle who couldn't take it with him when he moved to California. Maybe the girls will take lessons, but the lessons cost and we never had enough. Each night my mother's hands worried over dinner, slicing garlic, onion, tomato, her own fingers, and apologized to no one, to herself. I played from a worn music book, wanted to make her happy, but the songs always sounded sad, warped out of tune. So I thought of bright things as I played. Sunflowers, the orange groves she wandered as a girl in California, her father's Spanish accent, his smoky laugh. My hands grew stronger and stronger, though my mother never smiled. So beautiful, she'd call from the kitchen, praise for anything I could barely manage, scales or simple songs, a hymn called Mercy. William knew the words and sang it to me as we stood in the soaked soccer field at school, his dark hand closed over mine. The song I learned for him, though he would never hear me play. When the other boys chased me, I'd show them Mercy, a game played face to face, palm to palm, fingers interlocked. The aim is to twist each other's fingers, push back on the wrists and twist until one can't stand the pain and begs mercy. Whoever begs mercy first loses. Whoever grants the mercy wins. My father taught me. I always beat the boys at school, but never won against my father. William never wanted to play mercy. He said we were friends, and sometimes he'd bring me flowers he'd picked from yards and sidewalks, pansies, dandelion, morning glory, all wilted by the time he delivered them into my hands without ceremony here. We pretended to not know what it meant. We pretended to not know a lot of things, our stories exchanged without comment. His father had left a few years back. I thought him lucky not to have a father. Except this made his mother sad, awake at night, crying and touching William's tired eyes, the quick slope of his jaw, his soft chin, the paler creases in his dark palms, looking for signs of his father's return from God knows where with some white bitch he barely knew. My mother also cried a lot, alone in the blue light that shone through our curtains, waiting for my father to come home, talking whiskey, leave a few bruises on her wrists, smashing a piece of furniture, proof of his arrival, his sense of mercy. He would never hit her beautiful face. Sometimes William and I were too tired to talk on our breaks and just slumped together against the concrete wall, eyes closed. The only time I saw his apartment was on his birthday. His mother was surprised to find me pale and skinny on her doorstep and closed the door without saying why. I heard yelling, and finally William opened the door, let me in. His mother handed me a cupcake, told me to keep quiet. I was the only guest. We ate our sweets against the gray wall outside his room. Later, we sat on the parking lot curb, taking turns listening to the Walkman I'd given him, silver wrapping paper, silver bow, until my mother arrived in our metallic blue Chevy. I stood to say goodbye, but William was already walking away. We didn't talk for a long while after that, drifted like loose balloons over the school grounds until one day he found me near the cyclone fence at the edge of the soccer field where I wandered alone during lunch breaks. He wanted to play Mercy. It was early spring, still cold, our breath a whiteness rising between us. I agreed, and we walked through the muddy field to the far right corner, almost to the street, next to the telephone pole. It was as far as we could go without trouble. We faced each other, fingers interlocked. At the count of 3, we forced each other's wrists back. He winced at first, his fingers thin and flexible, but he made his face cold as he bent my fingers deeper so that I had to bend back. Our hands strained, shook. He stared up over my head as if something hovered there. Heat gathered in my tendons. I bent his fingers harder. His arms began to tremble and his eyes welled up. I knew he didn't have the leverage to push any further without hurting himself, but he showed no sign of saying mercy. I realized I could snap off his fingers and he wouldn't say it. I said, mercy, and our hands sprung apart, floated to our sides. He turned his back to me and shook out his fingers. You won, I said, but he didn't respond. Good job, I tried again, but he flinched away, showed me only a backward glance, the hard silhouette of his face. I placed my hand on his back beneath his thin shoulders, and as if pushed forward by my great brute strength, he bolted away from me, soared a straight line over the soaked field, the wet asphalt, into a door that slammed shut behind him. I leaned forward a little into the space he left. A beaten gold Buick drove past slowly. The telephone wires hummed. The next piece that I'll read is called Early Adulthood, and it's one of several pieces in the book that are linguistic collage. So instead of telling you about one particular event, I'm telling you about a whole swath of experience over several years, and so I'm jumping from sentence to sentence. Anyways, at this particular time period that I'm talking about, it included sort of the end of my undergraduate education in Santa Fe, and also my move to New York City, which I moved there on September 1st of 2001, so it was sort of less serendipitous than I would have liked. The buildings fell shortly thereafter, and I scrambled around to find some work, and it was just sort of this traumatic early adulthood sort of period, and since my family just isn't very involved with my life, I sort of felt like there was a lot going on that I didn't know, and I couldn't ask anybody advice of it, so I felt sort of confused the whole time. experience all the thing. Anyways, so this goes back and forth between Santa Fe and New York, and you'll hear that. I mean, if no, I just realized in the first line, so that's probably over explanation there. Early adulthood. I go from Santa Fe to New York, and New York for Santa Fe, longing for wherever I am not. Exiting the train at the Broadway stop, glancing at the still-standing buildings, I think of the way the Sangre de Cristos burn red in winter light. The first time I meet John, I walk away shaking, large dark eyes. The pigeons take flight. Through the back lot, the broken glass glows. I take a class called World Religions. I can't sleep next to him, so I lean from his window, watching the sunrise on the blue and white mosque. The beggar on the corner has no arms and no legs. When we want another round, we say, "Make mommy pretty." A famous beauty inquires about Warhol's electric chair. I dream of another life in which I am not a receptionist. Sparks rise from our limbs as we watch the skyline collapse, hold each other up like soft dolls on our vigil home. I stare a long time at the Rauschenberg collage hanging near my desk in my line of sight. We lift ice cubes from the tequila corazon to our mouths or drop them on the roof and call it hail. After, I trace the tattooed blue flames on his forearms. Instead of asking, I plant zinnias, sunflowers, love in a mist. For the first time, I see real Picassos, Van Goghs, and I can see the brushstrokes. But the famous beauty wonders what the electric chair means, why it's repeated 4 times on the faded red panel. Celine and I rename the men we are dating, the projectionist, the Irishman, the King of New Jersey. I sweep my leg over the saddle of his bike and grip my arms around his waist. The shop is empty and the sky uncharacteristically gray. Each time I look at the clock, only 3 minutes has passed. At the end of her street, we can see across the channel, lower Manhattan smoking in an empty space. Through the turnstiles, I walk into an angry crowd, everyone speaking a different language and no one speaking English. I take a class called The Art of Listening. Each morning, I sweep neat piles of seeds from the terracotta patio, throw them away. I hold him tighter than I need to, smelling his soap, sweat, the musk of his leather jacket. John says he still loves me, but he's leaving for San Francisco. The question of the painting pins her like a spotlight. Professor Diablo invites me to his house, pouring more tequila in my endless glass. Snow on sunflowers, dirty water sliding down the tiled station walls. Outside, boughs reach for my open window, their veins hot. Each time I look up from my desk, I think about the black and beige shapes of that Rauschenberg, the way they almost mean. He tells me I look like the Modigliani nude he posted over his parred bed the autumn he starved in Manhattan. He works with the crew down at Ground Zero, says, "I've seen too many people die today. I need you to hold me." Los Alamos on fire, Manhattan falling down. Each night I lie awake watching the bright green seeds of the Chinese elm outside our window fall like confetti. I take a class called Natural Disasters. Angelbug and I drive around listening to disco in his aqua-colored car. Celine says, "Oh, we don't wait in lines," as she glides past the bouncer and through the dented metal door. I decide not to speak, as so to seem mysterious. I like this vacillation between everything and nothing. The thick black smudge at the center of the painting might hide a form beneath it, and I like to imagine what that is. Rain pools red at the corners, candles at the corners, the buildings peeling with the faces of lost people. I'm crying so hard I don't even know I've stepped out into traffic. The lights look small from the roof, where we are slow with liquor and lean against the dark, heated slant. Professor Diablo leaves roses on my doorstep, messages crackling with flamenco music. Alone in the shop, propping myself up on an elbow, waiting for a customer to walk through the door so I'll have someone to talk to. I sleep in Erin and Emily's computer room, grateful for the warm blue lights, the soft electric hum. Mark smokes artfully near the pignon as snow falls on his wool jacket, his wavy red hair. I take a class called Paradise Lost. 3 mornings in a row, I wake up thinking, if you stay here, you'll be dead in 5 years. The Arabic-speaking family that owns the corner store is dragged out by police in the afternoon light. Professor Diablo shows up on my doorstep to say I should let him fuck me tonight. The sun goes down with a fight of gold, deep purple, a splash of red at the edges of hills. Lindsay is heartbroken, and I don't know what to do but feed her soup and bring her blankets. I stay in the job until the end of winter, leave just after the first good thaw. Celine tells me she's fallen in love, and I know that she means it when she says his real name. I'm happy for you, a shorn field in my voice. On the train home, I realize I'm no longer in love with John, and although he left years ago, the absence of love surprises me. Beneath the strong black strokes on Rauschenberg's canvas, I always see a human form falling and falling. In the end, she decides not to buy the electric chair, turns instead to a canvas of flowers. Spring arrives in secret, and I leave for another city. The channel water glints like something sharp. I like better to imagine that it hides nothing. So this last piece I'll read is more sort of traditional narrative in its layout. So there are less leaps. It's more straightforward. And the piece is called A Momentary Stay Against Confusion, which is a phrase I borrowed from a Frost essay on poems. And he sort of discusses poetry and which I extrapolate to mean sort of all literature in the way that it it's useful in the way that it sort of creates a parentheses around the continuous chaos of living, so it gives us a moment or a narrative or something for us to look at and for it to feel understandable as opposed to it always feeling like an onslaught of experience in some ways. And I was interested in that in this piece, which will probably become obvious to you, toward the end. But this particular piece took me a while to write, and it's because I kept going up to a certain point in the essay and wanting there to be a kind of neat wrap up, and I couldn't think of it. For a very, very long time. So, and you'll probably hear where that break is. It's called A Momentary Stay Against Confusion. I've mentioned before that I used to play piano. I had a small talent. Not enough to stay with it for long or for it to stay with me. Now whenever I find myself, so rarely in front of one of those grand instruments, there's an ache at my center, just below the heart, just above the stomach, some bright, unnamed bird fluttering on a branch in the rain. In college, before I learned how to ward off the falling sense of loneliness, I used to lie awake at night listening to my roommate murmur and gesture in her sleep until I couldn't take it anymore, and dressed in the dark, slipped out of the room to the empty halls, echoed down the tile stairs to go outside beneath a shatter of dry stars. It was New Mexico where everything is dry, my skin, my tongue, the shivering grasses, the Sangre de Cristos looming like great dry ghosts. Even my scuffle across the lot of sleeping cars to the music halls sounded dry to me as it echoed away. I've never learned to read music, so during the day when the halls were hot and filled with real musicians, I stayed away, some unarticulated sense of illiteracy, I suppose. But at night the halls were empty and I could play alone as loudly, as furiously as I liked. I made up songs or tried to teach myself little fragments of music I remembered from movies or radio. I knew a few tricks. My hands were small and quick, could add embellishment to melody, but mostly I played bold chords because they were satisfying, and I liked to listen to them reverberate in the small room. Sometimes I'd go on this way for hours, never beginning or ending a song, but pulling verses, choruses, fragments out of the center of compositions, leading from one fragment to another to build a new song. I like to stay in the middle of things, so I don't remember when I began to hear the other player in a room down the hall. I must have stopped to shake out my hands or stare out the window when it occurred to me that someone, a real pianist, classically trained in that unfaltering, cascading way, was performing some fantastic piece of music just down the hall. When I began listening, it was plaintive and melodic, but soon shifted into sharp, dissonant angles, then slowly, carefully, like the rhetorical modulations of a beautiful speech, it poured into a stately, almost elegiac cadence, like summer grass, growing as it withered away. Then only silence. I listened to the space the music left, waiting for some motion toward another song, but after a while I turned to my own creations to give whomever it was space to contemplate their next articulation. Do I have water? No, okay. I'll stop probably periodically. I'm like, oh, thank you, Will. Wait, have you drank out of this? Because I hear you're sick.
Yes, I have.
Thank you so much. It's all the dryness from the descriptions, right? It's having a literal effect on my throat. Okay. Then only silence. I listened to the space the music left, waiting for some motion toward another song, but after a while, I turned to my own creations to give whomever it was space to contemplate their next articulation. At the end of a particularly long run, I stopped to give my fingers a small rest and was sad to realize the pianist wasn't playing. But then the pianist began a sonata, slow and melancholy like rain clouds. I sat imagining each note fall from the sky into the lifted chest of the piano, glowing there like a new form. I listened all the way to the nostalgic, trilling end, and finally, when the pianist had finished, I turned again to my own simple songs. This went on for several weeks. Not every night, but many nights, I'd let the moon pull me outside and drift across the lot to the piano halls at some arbitrary point of cessation. I'd realize I'd heard the pianist in the middle of a song. We never arrived or left at the same time, so I only knew the person by the music, skill, and loneliness. Then one night, it was particularly late, and the pianist had just finished a waltz. After I'd recovered from a strong yawn, I decided it was time to leave and swung the door open and stepped out into the hall. Immediately, the door at the opposite end of the hall swung open and a tall, thin man stepped out. He had large eyes, a shock of white hair, and his skinny arm pointed at me definitively. You. Yes? You're not a music major. He began walking toward me. I'm sorry, do I need some kind of permission? Why aren't you a music major? Because I'm an English major? Well, you're a music major now, but I don't know how to. No need to audition for me. You've been doing that for weeks. I'm the department director. You're accepted into the program. Many of those songs are your own. Yes. Do you have any formal training? A year of lessons when I was 8. Well, you'll train with me. I don't know how to read music. He waved his hands up in the air with a scowl as if he'd just walked into a swarm of flies. That's easy. You can learn that. The other things, the things you already know, can't be taught. I'll teach you the rest. By now he stood just a few feet away, stiff-backed with a kind of midnight intensity shadowing his hollow cheeks. He looked at me with myopic attention. When he noticed my distress, he let the intensity in his face melt into something more amiable but not quite placid. Sorry, I'm not good at introductions. My name is Joe, and your name is Danielle. Fine, that's done then. I'll be teaching the music theory class next semester. It's required for all music majors. You should come to enroll in that, and also on the individual lessons with me. Come to my office this week so we can put through the paperwork and set a schedule. You shouldn't waste any more time. He was so scary. But I don't know if that's what I want to do. Of course it is. Why else would you come here in the middle of the night? I don't remember how the conversation ended, only drifting out of the room, back across the lot and up the stairs into my dorm room where I lay there dazed, staring up at the ceiling until I fell asleep. I did go to his office that week and signed up for the classes he suggested, but insisted that I be a music minor, not a major. He agreed to this, saying that I'd change my mind once I'd gained some confidence, and in the meantime I would be studying music. When I returned from winter break, I went to his office again to agree on a time for our individual lessons. I have 2 times available. One is on Monday, the other is right now. It was Friday on the first week of classes. I was tired of sitting patiently through instructions, and besides, he made me nervous. I felt I needed more mental preparation before I spent an hour at the piano with him. Monday. I think we should have the lesson now. We need to get started. It's not a real meeting. I just need to know where you are so I can know where we should begin. Monday is better for me, I lied. He saw through it, softened his face a little. Listen, I know some people find me intimidating, but you really don't have to be nervous. It wouldn't be a real lesson. You would just play something for me and I would listen, just as in the halls. I insisted again that Monday was better, and he stood back a little, clasped his hands behind his back and nodded. Fine then, Monday it is. I'll see you then. I tried to smile brightly as I left to show him he hadn't unnerved me, but of course he had. He gave me a small, concerned smile as I turned away, walked briskly out of the hall, my breath going before me in a white cloud as I left the building. I was relieved to not have to play for him right then, but wondered if I'd hurt his feelings, if it would somehow hinder our new relationship. I'll see him on Monday, I thought to myself. I can worry about it then. By the time I'd reached the other end of the parking lot, beneath the bare limbs of elms, I was thinking of something else. We never had the lesson because Joe died that night. Perhaps it's cruel of me to tell you this way. Perhaps I should have warned you that this wasn't a story. It happened. In a story, there's shape, there's meaning. A story promises relief and ordering what can't be ordered. I would like to believe that the stars, the dryness, the description of music, the words with which we speak to one another might mean something more, might finally point to the thing I would never have seen until the moment I see it. But for over a decade, I've contemplated this moment of my life, usually on dry, warm nights when I'm walking alone on a great expanse of pavement beneath the random stars. And after a decade of considering, reading the signs, drawing my mind over these scenes, I've concluded nothing from them. So I must conclude they mean nothing. Perhaps you're disappointed. Perhaps you wanted a more explanatory ending, one that includes the whole story. But it's midnight as I write this. The dark outside is the dark of another place, another era of my life, and because my life is not over, part of that past era as well. The small potted tree I keep by my window is slowly wilting from lack of sunlight. I'm in love, but always anxious. I no longer play the piano. I wish I could give you more, but my life is already moving on, has moved, and I simply drag this story with me. The whole story, we like to say, as if the past could be contained. Thank you very much.